The Uncommon Good is on the air. I'm Bo Bonner.
I'm Bud Marr, PhD.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, sometimes you throw the letters at the end of your name.
You got to flex the muscles. Well, we're coming to you from IA, that's Iowa, DSM, that's Des Moines.
Okay.
We're happy that all of you are joining
us. Here on
ICR. Here on ICR.
Iowa Catholic Radio.
Are we abbreviating things because school's getting ready to start, so we just need to fire off on the information as fast as possible?
We joke about this. I know the military loves acronyms. I feel like I'm at a health sciences college, and the medical field loves acronyms. So
it is
I
true.
just get in that mode.
I don't think, radio obviously has like call letters, so they sort of like that. But I think on air we're supposed to, I think the idea is to speak everything out as much as possible. Right. But clearly that doesn't happen either, because when we say PhD, we don't go philosopher. Wait, what is
Doctor of Philosophy?
No, but it's philosophe doctor. Yeah, it's
okay.
Something in Latin like that. The point is, this is the Uncommon Good. We're glad to have you. We want to say thank you to Imogene Ingredients for underwriting the show. As always, we appreciate Imogene for making the show possible, because we love having the opportunity to talk to all of you. Imogene Ingredients, thumbs up even though you can't see it. Thank you guys for all that you do.
I love Imogene Ingredients. I also love this week. When I was growing up, I had teachers and other authority figures in my life where in the morning they would say, "This is the day that the Lord has made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it," which is straight out of the Bible. But sometimes there was a little bit of a pep talk behind the greeting, like, cheer up, grumpy morning bear. But some days, here out in the world, I can say this is the day that the Lord has made easier. And this is one of those weeks.
Yeah, it's been absolutely beautiful.
Yeah, I love those cooler mornings.
And football.
Ooh, football.
Well, not quite football, but someone who you're going to want to make sure to tune in, just like all the football games. We have John Huynh, Director of Social Justice for Diocese of Des Moines and Catholic Charities. He's in to talk about the Bishop's new letter on immigration. You won't want to miss it. Stick around. This is the Uncommon Good. We'll be back right after this. We're back with the Uncommon Good. Bo Bonner and Dr. Bud Marr joining you this week. Thank you for listening to the show. So wonderful to have you with us. Today on the show, we have on friend of the show, John Huynh, who is the Director of Social Justice for the Diocese of Des Moines, who also does that work with Catholic Charities of Des Moines. He's here to talk with us about Pilgrims of Hope, a pastoral reflection on immigration that was issued by the Iowa Catholic Conference. That's a statement from the Catholic Bishops of Iowa. John, thanks for coming on the Uncommon Good.
Hi, Bud. Hi, Bo. Yes, thanks for having me on.
So let's get to some introductions out of the way. So what is this letter specifically about? Obviously about immigration, but what details does it get into, and why is it happening now? Why do we have the letter being put out jointly by the bishops in this time specifically?
Well, I think it's fairly obvious to, I'm sure, quite a few people why the letter is out. I think, with the current administration's movement on immigration policies. I think it's needed in a time where lessons in catechesis are concerned. So, in other words, it's a time when the faithful are seeing realities that question their faith, and so. The purpose of the letter, of course, is that it would be a teaching letter. It's written to form consciences, to provide clarity for Catholics about what the Church really says on immigration and the rights of the nations. I think it's worthwhile to mention that this letter itself, this reflection, is not a policy manual or a statement that belongs in partisan politics in any way. It's a pastoral and theological reflection. So, as you move through it, you can see key themes that really develop, themes like human dignity, the balance between that and state sovereignty. What does it mean to be just in context of that? And of course, it was released on the queenship, the queenship of Mary, and so there's a section in there calling to Mary and asking for us to approach Mary for her consolation and her help as we traverse these grounds.
Yeah, John, you mentioned there that it's not intended as a partisan statement. And early in the letter, I think the bishops kind of get at this point with a little more specificity. So early on, we read that immigration is not merely a political or economic issue. It's a moral issue primarily. What do you think the bishops are communicating by making that distinction?
Well, I think too often, as soon as we hear things like immigration, again, the Aristotelian kind of conviction is that we are political animals, and we take that almost to the letter, where we think that everything that we do has to do with politics, and what I mean is in modern politics, right? But that's not what immigration, especially in how the church views it, is. It's not initially a political matter at all. It's a moral issue. It's a moral matter because it begins with the human person. Immigration really, truly does have to deal with human folks. And so the church begins with the truth that every person is made in the image and likeness of God. This is in the very first chapter of the Bible. When families are forced to leave their homes because of violence or persecution or poverty, their dignity and their survival are certainly at stake. And so to ignore those realities and dismiss them as simply a political choice, it would be a moral failure on our part. Secondly, the human person, and then we talk about, and eventually I think we'll get into it, but the sovereignty of the state submits to the natural law, which is ordered within the divine law. And so these matters, as much as they are secondly, not that they are not political, but that they're secondly political, they're derivatively political, they are primarily moral.
And I think that might be precisely one way. I mean, I know we're going to talk about criticisms in general, but there's one way or interpretation of any letter like this, which is something to the effect of, oh, don't you see, this is just a way, if you shield a political stance with theological language, you can then choose one side or the other. I actually heard this best from our mutual friend, Father P.J. McManus, who last week, so on the 21st Sunday of Ordinary Time, he made this point precisely the Sunday after this letter had came out. And he made this point to say, this is not merely political, it's theological, because even if you come to the decision of something like, you need to deport someone, and no one who's being serious about this is acting like there's a world where Catholics believe no one should be deported. But if someone's going to be deported, the question is, how do you deport someone with dignity? And that's where it's a theological question that comes to bear no matter what you decide must be the practical outcome in the specific case, for instance, here in America in 2025. Are we asking questions like, if it comes to pass that we need to deport an individual, how would you do so with dignity? And of course, the answer is if you can't, that means you shouldn't deport them before any political situation. But if it is the idea that we need to do so, the theological pressing question is, even when you come to your practical, specific considerations, you must ask the deeper theological questions like, how would you deport someone with dignity? And so, what I think comes up with this, John, is that we can talk about the different methods or the different theories behind what is smart immigration. There are certainly reasons why people talk about the right of the state to address immigration and borders and things like this. But when it comes to the theological issues, we want to say, as you said, natural law is nested in the divine law, and there are laws that God himself has made that supersede all other laws, even if they make practical decisions for Catholics difficult. And as you said, foremost among them, all humans are made with the image and likeness of God. Therefore, you can't treat them subhumanly. And so this is where I think something that the bishops point out is to say, if you use language that renders an entire group of people as either barely human or subhuman, you are violating natural and divine law, and it's not just a matter of practicalities. And it is only being honest that there are people in the media, in political sections, precisely using that language against immigrants, illegal or otherwise. You can't describe them in subhuman manners, and that makes it a theological issue before any political issue.
Yeah, it creates also a kind of a changing, or rather a moving goalpost, if you will. So, for instance, initially there was this talk about, let's deport those who are convicted criminals and so on and so forth, right? But then what ended up happening when people challenged the methods in which some of these things were done, then the language became that, well, as long as you're entering our borders without proper method or proper permission from the government, you've broken the law and therefore a criminal. So not only was it initially just about the criminals who were criminals from the other countries who came in as criminals, but now those who may be innocent coming in, having broken the law, are now identified as criminal and therefore, placed under the same umbrella. And so this is essentially what I think what your point there, Bo, is that when we use language that really dehumanizes or caricatures or reduce immigrants to a problem or a threat, which in many ways, there are those that I've encountered have done, we've committed a moral violation, in my estimation. You've removed their dignity in some sense.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think an easy one. I mean, I'll just be bold on this one. Calling an entire group of people invaders is clearly rhetorical language meant to evoke, like, viruses, especially 5 years after something like the pandemic that we all experienced. To use that language about humans is to clearly make a rhetorical claim that even if you're saying, oh, I don't mean it specifically, it's a metaphor that certainly has a lot of cachet in the wrong direction. And so theology is word care, right? We are asked to be specific and charitable in the way that we describe even those who are opposed to us. So, I mean, that gets to the theological issue, right? John is, I'll erase that. That gets to the theological issue, right, John, is that if we are called to pray for our enemies, can you pray for an enemy with dignity that you have labeled an entire group as invaders or such language like that? This gets to the theological element underneath any of the practicalities of considerations for immigration itself.
I mean, to further the point, Pope Francis has warned us quite a bit about toxic rhetoric that essentially fuels fear and hostility, and that sort of rhetoric shapes opinions, right? It forms hearts in ways that make it very easy to justify harsh treatments or unjust laws. I mean, word care is exactly right. And so the church really insists in the letter, right, the bishop really insists that our speech itself has to reflect the kind of dignity that people deserve and people have.
Maybe it's kind of an unfortunate element of our times, but a dynamic of our times. But I think when Catholics sometimes read letters like this one, their initial thought process, even though the bishops start with like, this should be framed primarily as a moral question, is to sort of think like, well, what does this mean in terms of who I support politically? And so you come to a part in the letter where the bishops come right out and say, like, they've already talked about the right for persons to migrate in certain situations. At the same time, nations have the right to regulate their borders for the sake of the common good. And when you read that line, if you read it too quickly or haphazardly, you can think like, well, it's sort of undercut all that came before. But you have to follow it up with the next phrase, provided these safeguards are justly enacted with respect for fundamental human rights. This is dangerous, John, but I'm going to do a little thought exercise on air. And because I don't think I'm as well versed on this topic as you and Bo are. So, like, I know someone like St. Thomas, he says, for instance, like if a husband and father steals food to feed his children, it's of a different moral category than someone who steals for like selfish gain, right? Like he's providing in those circumstances, like he's been placed in a situation where the only way he may be able to keep his children alive is to take food, from the grocery store or whatnot. Would you say that you could have something similar going on? Because I guess when I've had conversations with serious Catholics who are wrestling with these questions, they'll sometimes say like, well, someone who's come in here against our laws or whatever, that person is an illegal. And I would say reading this letter, like, that's not quite precise, right? Like if someone is fleeing war, abject poverty, they're seeking, for the basic necessities to survive. That's something different than just, someone like flagrantly disobeying a law.
Yeah. Bo, do you want to speak to this? Or
I'll jump in here. So one of the things that's important to recognize here, it's a great point, Bud, is of course there are unjust laws on the books. So like, sorry to make this like as blunt as possible. If there was a law that let's make it something where Catholics, as it were, like flip the script on like where people believe political sides are. One of the things that we're fighting for in another aspect of Catholic social teaching is the right of nurses to be involved in abortions, right? And there are some states who have passed laws that say if you are a nurse, you must assist at abortions. And what does the Catholic Church say? That's not a law. The state might have it on the books, but because it violates natural law, it's not a law. And not only are you not a criminal for not following it, it is criminal to enact it and enforce it. And so what the bishops, maybe they don't say it like as bluntly as I'm about to say it. If there are laws that make it impossible for people to escape from war, be refugees from war, or to escape life-destroying poverty, if you are a nation that has made laws that make that impossible, it isn't a law. And in fact, you are wrong to enforce it. And so now this doesn't, and so I say that boldly to point out that's why they might be illegal to the law of a land, and that's just not the U.S., that's anywhere, but that is an unjust law, and so not following it is not unjust. Now, what I'll say to this is, of course, this means, right, like you were pointing out, there are laws nations can and should make to control their border. But funny enough, mostly what they are is about making sure that a nation can take care of people that come into the nation, and so as not to suppress wages for workers within the borders. And so this is where our four bishops in Iowa, but many bishops who write on this issue make this point, that the whole system has been set up for multiple moral failures. And so one of the reasons why there has been allowed mass immigration to the United States has been for the explicit purpose of suppressing wages. And so it is actually the responsibility of the United States to not allow that to happen. But what's then, of course, been flipped on its head is now when you start the rhetoric of invaders or criminals when people aren't criminals, it actually just, virtue is a mean between two extremes, and it goes past the mean that we need to get to and goes well off the other way. So in multiple ways, it's not just a matter of the current policies need to go away and we can get back to the good old status quo where nothing's wrong. Multiple bishops have said that is not the case. There has not been a status quo for years that has fallen aright under what Catholic social teaching demands for immigration. What must happen is a unified bipartisan effort to actually deal foundationally and fundamentally with this problem that addresses the Catholic both and, the dignity of people who are seeking a better life or fleeing war, and the people and workers in the United States who would have their wages suppressed if unchecked immigration is allowed to happen. And so we have the responsibility to do the much more difficult thing, which is addressing both. But as long as we sort of go back and forth bandying like which side we need to be on, we're not being the Catholic witness against both of these vices, right? Rather than attaining to the virtue as the mean between two extremes.
Yeah, so Bud and Bo, to your point, when I was listening to your question there, Bud, I couldn't help but think of kind of the moral action, right? The threefold part of the moral action, the object, the intention, the circumstance. When you talk about stealing, right? The act itself, of course. And when we look at immigration, I think if we look at it through the moral lens of those kind of tripartite pieces of a moral action, I'd say that from the migrant's perspective, the object, of course, is to seek safety, to preserve one's life, and the good and necessary conditions for thriving, and of course, the intention is survival, and it's not lawlessness. And so, if we don't group them in such a way that we dehumanize them, if we look at that intention and that act, I think the circumstances also that surround them justify their movement. And so, on the other hand, when you have the state who has a legitimate act in and of itself, the intention behind it, of course, is always towards the common good and protecting the citizens and newcomers. But if the circumstances don't match up, so if the laws and the practices, as Bo was mentioning, mistreat those people who are now in its care justly in any way that's less than human, or remove due process, or relying on fear-driven rhetoric, if you will, then it fails the moral act. So for us as Catholics, of course, our intention must always be to love our neighbor, not for political gain, not for fear or loss. Easier said than done, I think, but that should be our intention, and it should never excuse us to not follow the command that the Lord has given us. And of course, as you mentioned St. Thomas Aquinas. Aquinas reminds us that moral acts have to be judged by all of those three. The great St. John Paul II wrote as well on that. The object, the intention, and the circumstance have to be taken together, and they show us that immigration really is not. It's beyond a political puzzle, I think. A really deep moral question that we have to respond in justice.
Well, I kind of worry that in our present circumstances, like, we're all sort of plagued by a poverty of imagination. And what I mean by that is sometimes as we debate this topic, the alternatives that are set on the table are either like completely open borders or just this like stringent policy that would allow little to no immigration. I tip my cap to the bishops for drilling deeper and shining light on the fact that there are a whole host of concerns within this broader topic that, regardless of where we land, on I hate to keep bringing up like partisan politics, but regardless of where we land on that spectrum, like things like due process as just like fundamental to the natural law or grounded in the natural law, using military assets to enforce immigration laws, reinterpreting things like birthright citizenship that have been on the books for a long time now. And in all of these areas, like, I think as Catholics, we have pressing concerns, and it's things that we can address and shine a light on, sort of like setting aside maybe the areas that bring more heat.
And John, we're getting ready. We're close to the break here. So if one more time, like as we're exiting here, just to do the reset, can you say a little bit about the name of the letter, where people can find it out, and just a real quick quip on that? Then we'll go to the break.
Yes, this is called Pilgrims of Hope, a pastoral reflection on immigration, and people can find it on our diocesan website, dmdiocese.org, or they can also find it on the Iowa Catholic Conference .org website as well.
It's very important to talk about, to listen to the pastoral, the magisterium of the church. I think people who maybe have been worried about reading the document because it seems like a big flashpoint or anything like that, I hope would be pleasantly surprised by the fact that, as I think Bud's alluded to this, being willing to go several layers deeper, to take time to ask deep questions, to set not only, as you were pointing out, John, the object of what we're considering, but also the context and why eternal principles are at stake, but trying to point out and navigate how we would think about them in the here and now about very specific things. So I can't say enough that anybody who's out there listening, this is a document. It's gentle but direct. It doesn't try to be vague, but it doesn't try to come out on sides or to be partisan. It doesn't point fingers. In a very basic way, it's asking us to consider these truths. And so I think it's the sort of exactly the thing someone would want out of the magisterium of the bishops. This is The Uncommon Good. Bo Bonner and Dr. Bud Marr. Stick around. We'll be back right after this. Back with The Uncommon Good. Bo Bonner and Dr. Bud Marr joining you this week. Thank you for listening to the show. So wonderful to have you with us. We've been talking with John Huynh. He is the Director of Social Justice for the Diocese of Des Moines and Catholic Charities of Des Moines. We're talking with him about the new document by the bishops of Iowa, Pilgrims of Hope, a pastoral reflection on immigration, a statement from the Catholic bishops of Iowa. John, thanks for coming on the Catholic Morning Show.
Hey, Bo. Hi, Bud. Thanks for having me.
So, we've talked about the document itself, but I know when we were talking beforehand, you brought up that there's actually a study guide that maybe can help people think through this. So if you don't mind saying a little bit about that first.
Yeah, the idea behind it, of course, when this was put together, I think the idea was that this study guide is meant to help people to pray with and sit with the letter and talk about it together. That's also very helpful. And so it breaks the letter into, or the reflection into, manageable sections with scripture passages and reflection questions that really help bring the teaching into conversation. So I would really encourage folks to get into a small group, maybe something at the parish level or around the kitchen table, if you will, and walk through it. It is also found on the iowacatholicconference.org website.
I think one thing that's important for people to understand, again, is like if you don't like what I'm saying, if you think Bud's throwing too many curveballs, or if, John, for whatever reason, what you're saying is not, just hitting them right. The big thing to point out is this document is good teaching document. It doesn't come out and school-marm you. It doesn't point fingers. It wants to, it's faith-seeking understanding from the shepherds of our diocese. And like you said, in every way possible, this has been rendered to try to bring along a conversion of hearts and minds from the whole political spectrum to start to ask, what are the theological things that undergird all of this? The letter itself, the study guide, like you said, I think it's integrally important for people to give this a chance. Like when we talk in theology about docility, it's not about being a doormat and just saying, saluting yes, sir, to anything any prelate says. But this is exactly the sort of shepherding I think most people want. The document really does try to take the time to think with people, talk with people, present what's going on here. And, John, you've pointed this out that, faith is risky. And so it's not that it doesn't say bold and specific things. Faith is risky, and the bishops have taken this risk with us. And you see this in a prevalent way, that they keep talking about pilgrims of hope. The goal is to overcome fear and political fighting and to ask, what can we hope for looking forward when we think about the issue of immigration?
Well, I think, so I recently was naming the virtue of hope as the little sister in a column that I wrote for the Catholic Mirror from Thomas Piggy, who imagines faith, hope, and love, and faith and love are two bigger sisters, and they're moving through the street, and hope is the little sister in between them, and it from everyone's perspective, it looks like it's faith and love who are pulling hope along, but in fact it's the other thing. It's hope that's actually drawing the two sisters forward. I think that's important. It's a great image because it's hope that keeps us going, right? Like it's the thing that tells us in the midst of all this messiness, sometimes very chaotic situations that we have found ourselves in, that the Lord has promised us that that love and light will prevail. And so I think for all of us, even those who might be who might take exception to this letter and who might see it as something other than what it is, that there is a hope in the Lord being able to change hearts and change minds. And in my experience, I think folks who change have to have their hearts change first before their minds changes. It's not always the case, but it's often the case that the hearts change and the minds change. And I think that's where the bishops are drawing forward, is that there's this theme of hope and emphasizing that when people have their hearts unhardened, that we can certainly move forward in a more just way.
When I read the letter, John, my thoughts kept going to the Old Testament, and in the foundational scriptures of the Old Testament, an enduring image for the Israelites, for the people of God, is that you were once strangers in Egypt, like you were foreigners in a foreign land. And so when they inherit the land, they're asked to treat the stranger in their midst with, to acknowledge and respect their dignity. Sort of like, I think the Old Testament even uses language of like, love the stranger as you love yourself, right? And thinking about that, like how central that is to kind of the vision of the Old Testament. When we read this letter, the bishops, to their credit, they do operate sometimes at pretty broad principles because there are elements of life that are left to prudential judgment. I think the danger in that, as the faithful, as we walk away from reading the letter, is to say like, well, what can I really do? There are these principles. I don't know how they would intersect with my daily life. I would say here in Des Moines, with the diversity that we have, like even thinking at the level of like the local ecclesial community, there are a lot of opportunity to care for the orphan, to care for like migrants and refugees. And so like for myself, it kind of just starts with, do I see the face of the other? I know right now, like your role is with Catholic Charities. Where and how do you see like this sort of activity going on? Like as someone's listening to this episode, like where do I begin as I think about like loving the stranger?
Well, okay, before I answer that, but I'd like to focus on what you were saying, because certainly you both know more about this than me, but in terms of the shift in Vatican II, right, where at one point we see kind of these things as being challenging and challenging our priests and our religious to live these things out, these principles out. It's now, since Vatican II, the shift is going, well, it's the lay people who have a vocational call to live these principles out. So the bishops and the priests, their roles are to teach, to lay out in some sense, the broad strokes, but it is the task of the people, all of us, who are called to and baptized really into the priesthood of Jesus Christ, to live this out. And so it's very necessary for all of us to recognize that we're not bystanders in all of this. We are very much involved. In terms of living this out, I think in our diocese, at one point we at Catholic Charities we did have a refugee services. We no longer do that, but we have a
real quick note, John. Sorry to interrupt your thought. It had to stop because of political decisions. So it's not just like
yes,
right. So it's very important to point out there are massive ramifications for how the church has done her business in this diocese. And so that's, again, not to like point political fingers, but this really has implications that didn't go away just because the Des Moines Diocese decided one day to wake up and not do it. So, sorry, proceed.
I think the answer can be both really simple and you can go as deep with it as you want to, but we already know that immigration really is an abstract issue in our city, right? the bishop named this already. We do have support for housing. We have the shelter. We have the food pantry. We have a role right now that began because of the ending of the refugee services. It's our community navigation person. So there are ways that people can get involved, of course, with Catholic Charities specifically, but there are other ways in a more general manner, and the letter outlines this, right? People can go to, the faithful can go to Iowa Catholic Conference. There are issues there that the Iowa bishops are working on, either they're signing on to something, or they are voicing their concern about something that's moving forward. The letter, for instance, speaks to that. So, being proactive in searching out, because we certainly can say, well, you can come to me and tell me what to do, or we as adults, I imagine all of us are adults who are listening to this, we can certainly go, if this matters this much, because it matters this much, I need to go and I need to find out how I can help in this context and bring justice to an issue that is currently running rampant, ubiquitous, really, in our country.
Yeah, the bishops say that we have to do something more than just platitudes, and I think and to be honest, that's about as like straightforward as they get. Like, I really want to point out that the gentle nature of this letter, I think, is something that all of us would want out of shepherds. But they said this has to go on beyond platitudes, and I think that that's something that should stick in the craw of all of our hearts to ask: am I just doing platitudes when I say one thing or the other about this issue? I think very practically, just to talk about word care even, because sometimes people go like, oh, all you're doing is talking, words don't matter. But look, I think confronting people that use the vilifying and dehumanizing language that the letter brings up, to confront that and say, that's not what we should be doing in the church. I mean, for any human, but especially most of the immigrants who we're talking about, fellow Catholics, are you willing to do that? Are you willing to let politicians speak in your name in dehumanizing ways? That's one thing we can do. Another thing to go beyond platitudes is to stop acting like immigrants are pawns in a political fight. Because this goes the other way as too. If the current group that is in power right now gets voted out, I have to say everything points to things not ultimately being A+ on the report card of immigration. There's been long-standing problems for decades, no matter who's been in power. So to use immigrants as a pawn to just get your party to out the current one is also a platitude. And you have to go beyond that and have to say there's something more than just using this issue to get what I want, to virtue signal, to seem like I'm a certain sort of person. And I mean, part of this gets back to, I think about how Pope Leo XIV on the Queenship of Mary had us pray and fast for peace in Gaza, in Ukraine, and in the wars throughout the world. John, I think that's something people should really take to heart. Is there praying and fasting that we can do here in Des Moines, not about the abstract issue of immigration per se, but for what migrants in our community are facing? Are we willing to pray and fast for that issue? Not only for it to turn out how we want, but that there's some true resolution, or at least some better action going forward for these people suffering injustice.
Yeah, I certainly think that there is a way for folks to do that, and they ought to consider it if they're able to. I think one of the inherent dangers in the current conversation, of course, is that we reduce. Bo, you were talking, and it just reminded me. We reduce our immigrant brothers and sisters to statistics. Now, lest we all forget, I'm an immigrant myself. And my parents are immigrants, of course, naturally. And so, there are faces behind the descriptions or the numbers even. At one point, when I was entering college, the thing that people said that you should never get into a class where you are just a student number, or you're just a number to a professor, because you're not personal. You're not personalized. They don't care about you. They'll weed out classes and all of these things. And we see kind of the inherent danger in that, don't we? We see why that is not desirable. And yet, for some reason, we do this thing where we group people together. It's not just immigrants, but currently that's what's happening, is that we group them all together and we call them these whatever names that we use. And that's really the inherent danger. And so we have to remember that these are people. These are people loved by God from eons ago, from before time began, that he knew that they would be here. They would exist. And our loving Father loved them and knows every hair on their head. So we have to stop pretending that they are not human in some way.
And, and to add on this in terms of subsidiarity and locality, so to add, like, okay, personally, you are our friend. We personally know that story. But to get to, like, Des Moines itself, Des Moines has a long tradition of being particularly welcoming to refugees and the stranger. You look at the Vietnamese community, the Bosnian community, Somalian, Nepalese. I mean, I'm leaving tons of people out. Des Moines itself has had a unique character for being willing to welcome in the refugee, the immigrant. And so it's particularly sad to me, John, that over a national issue playing out on a big political stage with a big political football by both parties, Des Moines has lost some of its character that for decades has been specific to the city of Des Moines. And that is the sort of incarnational recognition, right? The flesh that ideas take in a particular place. If we're not willing to protect that, then we're going to sway at the wind of every large national political issue. And so that's why I think it's elemental to get to specifics and incarnational ones, which is, I think, that the bishop's letter has done a good job of.
Yeah, John, if someone were to stumble on this letter, say especially a non-Catholic, they might be surprised that it ends with a section that treats Our Lady and has this kind of Marian thread at the end of the letter. Why do you think that was important for the bishops to bring the Mother of God into the picture as they were talking about this issue?
I think when we talk about Mary in the context of immigration, we're talking about a real situation that was part of the history of our faith, right? The Holy Family's flight into Egypt makes Mary, Joseph, and Jesus all immigrants, or refugees, rather. I'm sorry. But the Holy Family's flight makes Mary herself a refugee. So we know that she knows what it's like to be displaced, to entrust herself to God where there is no guarantee of safety. And that's why I think the bishops lift her up in this letter as the person who we should go to, he who is an advocate of immigrants, advocate of refugees. She is not only the mother of our church, but the one who accompanies families on the move today. And I think she teaches us what it means to respond to displacement with faith. She embodies trust in God's providence when human structures fail. So for our brothers and sisters who are immigrants, that provides the kind of hope for them. And when the church invokes Mary in this way, it's really a call for us towards conversion, because she gathers us really into her maternal heart and reminds us how we treat the immigrant woman, man, child is really how we treat her son. And that the bishop was clear on this over and over again, right? How we treat the strangers, how we treat Jesus, and how we treat, of course, Mary's son. So just as she at Cana interceded, she intercedes today for those who are vulnerable, the immigrants and the refugees who are on the margins of society. And so we turn to her as the advocate of migrants to keep us from reducing our brothers and sisters to politics, or as I was saying, to numbers, and to help us see in them the image of her son, Jesus.
You know, John, as we wrap up here, I think of a sort of two-pronged way that this letter moves us forward. One is to be willing to ask very practical questions that, brush up on politics, not because they're political first, but that theology makes us ask the political ones. Things like, if we're going to, tighten up enforcement of the borders on the immigrants themselves, why aren't the people who are employing illegal immigrants, which also breaks the law, why isn't that being enforced, for instance, against the people who are employing people, right? Like questions like that. Why don't we have practical, more systemic questions and only focus the question on this group of people, denigrating them? But to point out the Marian point as well, I think about the Marian apparitions very important to the city of Des Moines. So with the Vietnamese community, you were on the show just earlier at the Catholic Morning Show talking about Carthage and Marian days. Our Lady of Lavang was about refugees from the communist slaughter, right? And like Mary being there in the forest for her Catholic children when things went bad. And then I think about Our Lady of Guadalupe, the patroness of Americas, that not Mexico only, the Americas. We have a shrine to Our Lady of Guadalupe in Wisconsin, right, where you can buy cheese curds. Our Lady of Guadalupe, patroness of all the Americas. If we can't see as Catholics our citizenship in the city of God first, if we can't see ourselves first as children and subjects of the Holy Queen under the auspice of Our Lady of Guadalupe, we are not looking at the world correctly. And so if we can't entrust ourselves to Mary, Mother of Jesus Christ, then we are missing the boat. There's something fundamental that we aren't willing to clear from our eyes in order to see this correctly. And so I hope everyone who's listened to this show advocates strongly asking Mary that whatever we need as Catholics in this nation in order to listen to the magisterium of the bishops in this letter and go forward with our brothers and sisters on both sides of the political aisle and immigrants specifically, we have to have Mary's help, or otherwise it seems like we're consistently going to be wandering in the wilderness, just like the Old Testament said of those who denied the stranger in their midst. John, before we let you go, just one more time, where can people find this document and the study guide?
Yes, Pilgrims of Hope, the pastoral letter, can be found on dmdiocese.org, which is the diocesan website, or they can also find it on iowacatholicconference.org, where the letter is there, and also the study guide.
Absolutely. John, we appreciate it so much. John Huynh, Director of Social Justice for the Diocese of Des Moines and Catholic Charities in Des Moines. Always welcome to come on The Uncommon Good, and we're glad to have you. John, thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks, Bud, and thanks, Bo.
This is The Uncommon Good. We'll be back right after this. Back with The Uncommon Good. Bo Bonner and Dr. Bud Marr joining you this week. Thank you for listening to the show. So wonderful to have you with us. Thank you, Imogene Ingredients, for underwriting the show. It's because of you that we're able to keep all of this trucking along, and we are grateful. Bud, that Dr. Huynh, he's a good guy. Plenty of awesome things to say, even on difficult issues like what the bishops addressed in their letter on immigration.
Yeah, good conversation. John is one of those guys where, at the auctions these days, they'll auction Dinner with the Bishop, or I think a musical performance by Joe Stopulus. If there was, wine and cheese with John Huynh, I would bid a lot.
Yeah, well, the other thing, he actually is a great cook. Have you ever had his pho when he's made it? It's his mom's recipe.
I've eaten pho with John. But you're more fortunate than I am to taste the authentic, originally made from scratch. Yeah, it's true. He's authentic anytime he gets a chance to talk on the mic. So, Bud, with authentic chances to pray along with Iowa Catholic Radio, what can folks do to do so? Yeah, please do remember these times at 4:30, 6:30, and 10 a.m. we pray the Rosary on air, the Chaplet of Divine Mercy at 2:55 in the afternoon. And you can end your day, if you'd like, praying the Rosary. I believe the one at 8 p.m. is with Father Benedict Groeschel. But also, feel free to use the Iowa Catholic Radio app to pray the rosary anytime, anywhere.
If you want to check out what we're doing in and around the Iowa Catholic Radio listening area, easy to do. Go to iowacatholicradio.com and hit the events button. September 3rd, the 11th annual Iowa Catholic Radio Men's Stag at Country Lane Lodge, 5 p.m. And then we'll have our first Friday Mass September 5th, 11:30 a.m. at Iowa Catholic Radio Studios. And folks, remember, this doesn't exist except through your prayers, your volunteer hours, and fall fundraisers coming up, but also through your donations. You can donate at 515-223-1150 or hit the donate button online at iowacatholicradio.com. This is The Uncommon Good. May Jesus Christ, the Prince of Peace, reign in our hearts, family, city, state, nation, solar system, galaxy, the whole kit and caboodle. This is The Uncommon Good, and we'll be back next week.